Hey everyone, looking forward to getting started. My name is Vinay. I support the engineering team at Augment. Augment's an AI coding assistant and an agent for specifically designed for large code bases. A fun part of my journey is I get to speak with a lot of professional software teams using AI in real world. That's what this panel is about today. So super excited to share some of the stories that they've been living, and hopefully you'll take something very tactical away from the conversation. So let me just give you a quick overview, and then in the next slide, the panel will introduce themselves too. For today, we figured we'll talk about three things. When we talk to our customers, one of the things you often see is this AI maturity scale, all the way from experimentation, super early, I've heard about this, to I'm using this in the software development lifecycle, and it's actually meaningfully adding value, right? There have been many talks today. I've been listening to a bunch of them. There's a lot of talk about using AI as mostly as an adoption as a metric. Hopefully today you'll hear a little bit more than that in terms of how real software teams are getting value in their day-to-day, right? And then last but not least, we'll touch on the human element of change, because I think no matter if you're doing 0 to 1 or professional software teams, that part never goes away. So with that, I think this is sort of like the scale of things, right? If you look at it, experimentation on this end, which is very much like, okay, can I try it? How do I try it? Where do I try it? All the way from mixed success. Some people seem to be hitting the jackpot. Others don't understand why they're not hitting the jackpot. There's some early wins where, I think there's repeatability. Folks starting to see oh yeah, there's something clicking here. Let's lean into that. I think there's a bit of that. And I think really after stage 3 is where I think a lot of insight comes into, okay, what does this mean? How do we bring this into our software development lifecycle? I think 5 is a lot more futuristic. We've been talking about org design might look different. What companies look and feel like might look very different. That's a lot more forward-looking. So with that, maybe I'll start off with Josh. If you could just introduce yourself, and I'd love to hear where you think your team is and sort of how long it took you to get there.
Sure. I'm Josh Rotenberg. I'm a field engineer at Redis. Just in case you don't know what field engineering is, we are an engineering group that kind of supports customers directly. There's a lot of crossover between what solutions architects and maybe professional services do. But I feel like we focus more on taking things from customers and then building things that are more generally useful for them, for customers, rather than focusing on one customer at a time. Honestly, I mean, my team is split between the field engineering team, the actual AI, implementing AI solutions at Redis, and developer experience. So for us specifically, I would say we're in the 3, 4, or 5 range for sure. Everyone I know on my team is using some AI tool for something. I'm using tools every day to write code and work on repos and do all kinds of stuff. Overall, as a company, again, we're all over the place. A lot of our customer success teams are doing a lot of things with Glean, for example, and bridging the gap between what's in Salesforce, what was spoken in Slack, maybe what's in a repo somewhere, trying to pull that all together. But we're pretty hard into AI stuff. So I would say overall, we're a solid 3.75 and maybe approaching 5 in some places with people going crazy. So I'd say we're way beyond 1. 2 maybe in some areas that haven't found a lot of value yet, or figuring out what the value is. But yeah, we're all in.
Awesome.
We've done a lot.
Very cool. Anand?
Hi, I'm Anand Sankaran. I'm a senior principal software development engineer at Workday. I am also a wilderness backpacker. I'm a photographer. I do art shows. And the reason I say that is I write a lot of software for my hobbies. And I've been doing AI, using AI both at work and personally. Personally, I'm at 4 and 5. I ship plugins that a lot of people use and so on. At work, my team is at 3. Other teams within Workday are 2-ish right now. Given the nature of the way we ship software, it's a little bit more measured and slowed down. But I do let my hobby projects influence my work.
Forrest?
Forrest, I'm a staff SRE at Gartner Health and head up our platform engineering team, which is right now a bit of a mix between SRE and developer enablement, which is where our AI usage comes in. We have been using Augment since earlier this year for a lot of coding assistance. And one of the interesting things that I think we've seen is there is a range of where we're at. Whether 2 is probably on the lower end, with a lot of people kind of still being hesitant to use AI on their day-to-day like engineering workflows, to up to 4, where we have some CI/CD pipeline triage that is actively being used internally. So we're kind of a bit all over the place. That's just with AI coding assistance. We also have other teams that are currently doing their own sort of like AI experiments that is still early in the process.
Very cool. So let's dive into it. I think we figured we'll kick off with this tagline of beyond vibe coding. Like how are software teams leveraging AI today, right? And maybe I'll kick off with Anand, because one of the things I think Anand pointed out about hobby projects and some of the insights and learning, how that translates back into work. That's a fantastic story. So Anand, maybe you can go from there.
Yeah. So there are a lot of coding projects, but I wanted to show you something that is non-coding, like that. As every senior engineer has, if you do the Eisenhower matrix, right, you have these important, not urgent things that keeps piling up, right? And you think that you'll get to it someday. And one of those things was, Workday has a really rich data model. There exists a catalog of all our metadata. There was, many hundred lines of structured code and many megabytes of data. I couldn't make any sense of it. So on a Friday evening, I said, hey, look, I want to tackle this thing. Can I use Augment Code to describe the model? So the first few phases of it was me trying to explain to Augment how the model, how the catalog is established, right? And then I was telling it, Augment was like stumbling a little bit. I said, hey, this is really large. Maybe you should partition it. I was building an indexing engine. So this goes on for a while. And a little bit later, now attached a MCP server to it, now it can actually execute queries. I'm asking natural language questions to it. It's answering me with real data. Once you attach a MCP server to it, it's now forming queries, and the queries are incorrect. It's correcting them, and I'm like, this is interesting. Now I get to this phase. I'm now asking Augment, why are you slow? And Augment tells me, because you're using Markdown files. And I'm like, can you make it better? And it says, yeah, I can use JSON. And I'm like, what's stopping you? It's like, okay. So we got into this loop. This was super interesting. Remember, I started at 5 o'clock on Friday. Now it's like 2 in the morning on Saturday. And that's the other thing I love about Augment, which is, one, it doesn't give me a timeout like Cloud Code does. I don't have an enterprise license. And the second is, once I hit this loop, like the true flow state, we both were working together, and that's when the penny finally dropped for me. As in, I hear managers talk about treating AI agents like an intern and how do you train them. At this point, I started treating Augment like my partner, right, as an equal. So once we started figuring it out, it reached a certain stage where Augment started teaching me things about the model. Part of it is our model is like super rich, and it started figuring out insights that I didn't know. I'm in the platform side. Maybe our app developers knew far better, but that's when this got really interesting to me. So now I'm learning more and more deep insights. Can you go to the next slide? Now I started asking it very vague questions. Workday is a HCM software. Now I'm asking it, should I be doing succession planning for any of my employees? Augment figured out that to do succession planning, you look at the age of the employee, look at their tenure, and then you look at their job title. And it figured out by executing queries, random queries, to gather all this data. And then it came up with a subset of people I should be planning succession planning for. Now, over a weekend, I accidentally created an agent, which is a business analyst for HCM software, and that was not my goal. My goal was to make sense of the model. And that's when I started using Augment as much as I can for all of my important, not urgent projects. And I've had a lot of good progress and success with it.
Nice. If I may follow up, I think one of the things you pointed out, which is when you first started trying it, right? It wasn't giving you exactly what you did on the get-go. Right. Did you make previous attempts? What was that sort of made you stay on it to really have this explosive productivity outcomes?
A lot of it was just making it remember the context. right? Somewhere along the line, I realized that one was, we all start with prompts and then you move to specs. The more detailed the specs are, things get better. And the second was, all these things have memory of gap years and momentum, right? They have they remember the last 5 minutes. So what I kind of figured out is if you instruct Augment to write down its learnings in a format that it can quickly digest, it starts to learn. And that was my first learning. Like when I went through the indexing and then it quickly figured it out, I said, hey, you have this really large thing. I want you to index it. And it's like, can I write scripts? I said, go write scripts. And then it wrote scripts. And then it wrote information about what scripts it wrote. And then I figured out, okay, this is the key. So long as I tell Augment to write down everything it's learned and ask it to reread it every time it comes back, and that was the breakthrough.
Very cool. Awesome. Let's go to a completely different part of the software development lifecycle, and maybe Forrest, you can talk about some of the things you've been doing.
Yeah, so one of the things, if you've ever been a part of a developer experience or developer enablement team, you'll know is developers love to debug CI failures, just so much. And what that manifests in a couple different ways in terms of issues to solve. Like one is obviously a support burden on the developer experience team if you have one of those. The other is also in sort of like a frustration or cognitive overhead for the developer because they're just like, I just want to work, And in order to sort of alleviate both of those points, we developed something that we just call the pipeline analyzer. And what it is, it utilizes Augment's CLI called Augie, which is built into an image, and with Augment's context engine, which carries with it the entire project, as well as anything else that you add into it with, like, for example, an instruction file. So if one of your CI jobs fail, like maybe it's a build job, there's a specific instruction file that will import and will say, like, look at these specific things for your build failure. And maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And it gives a sort of L1 support for developers that may not necessarily want to look and debug at their CI job failures, but it lets them have a bit more context than they would otherwise. And what we've seen is it actually has reduced slightly the number of support tickets that come into like my team in order to help people debug these sorts of situations. But more importantly, I think, and we'll touch on this in a little bit on the human side, but more importantly, what it enables is it enables a developer to start thinking in terms of how can I use this to help myself in other areas of my development workflow. So rather than like my team having to go and figure out all of these things, they can now do it themselves. They are empowered to say like, well, I saw it work here. Will it work in this other situation as well? And so like I had a conversation with a developer earlier this week saying like, how can I improve the instruction files for this? Because it sort of led me down the wrong path on this test failure. It's like, great, well, here's the repo with all the instruction files. Add your specific failure, add the steps that you had to follow, and now that is embedded within the Augment context engine the next time that failure shows up. So it sort of builds on itself over time.
So this is in production, live, being used day to day?
Yeah.
Can you go, I'd love to hear, maybe if you go deeper on, what was the world before and what is the world today? In terms of like a particular flow for your team and maybe
Yeah, so I mean, I sort of touched on it a little bit. The typical flow before would be a developer sees their pipeline fail and it was working locally and they go, I'm frustrated. And then they go and they file a support ticket because they're not going to spend any amount of time looking at that job. Yeah. That's just the reality. To the way it is today is that developers are starting to see that like this provides actual real world benefit to me. And also I don't have to go and bother someone else, which like, again, the human side of it, like developers don't want to go and bother someone for something like that. Like it's hard to go and ask for support or questions for something like a CI pipeline failure. Like, well, that sucks, And so it sort of removes that burden from them. And we've seen, like I said, like a slight decrease, mostly because of adoption. There's a lot of people that aren't currently using it. But the ones that are, we've seen reductions in actual support tickets that come into the system.
Nice. Maybe one last one for you. As you're experimenting across different things, what made you pick this as the one that, to have the highest impact?
Selfishly, it's because I hate answering those questions. But realistically, I think that this gets into using AI for the right issues And what I mean by that is we want to utilize engineers and their creativity and their innovation to solve interesting problems and not spend all of their time trying to figure out like, oh, it's Sego enabled, got it. You know, like that's not interesting. Like that's not something that they want to spend their time doing, and it's not something I want to spend my time or my team's time doing trying to debug for other people.
I love that. I think take more toil away so that folks can be in the flow for longer. Let's go to now a completely different perspective, and I'd love to hear, Josh, how you've been sort of engaging with AI.
My use case is actually pretty similar to Forrest in a slightly different take. If anyone has worked at any company for more than 3 months, you've probably got at least 2 or 3 legacy code bases that nobody wants to touch. Somebody's left. It works until it doesn't work, and then you're kind of stuck holding the bag. I had a situation recently. In field engineering, we touch a lot of things. We do a lot of small things for customers here and there. There's a library here. There's a library there. Redis has been around a long time in multiple sort of incantations. So there's a lot of stuff. And there's no way for anyone to know who to go to. We have a worldwide engineering group, and there are time zone issues. There are people leaving issues. There are people no longer wanting to respond to you on Slack issues like everyone has. I recently had a situation where we had a library, a Java library that no one had looked at for, I don't know, a while. And all of my team members were busy with other things. Customer had a need for a feature. And I said, this is a great use of AI. Let me tell me what this thing does. Don't make me spend, like I said, 3 days versus 3 months. 1 day versus a week. That's a lot of engineering time that can be saved by getting that context back and saying, tell me what this does. Here's the feature I want to add. What's it going to take? Can we do it? And can we leave it better than we found it? Can we write docs? Can we write tests? Can we go back and write tests for all these things that don't have tests? So I've found just a ton of value in being able to be an archaeologist and go find things that are not in a good state, and within a couple of hours, maybe a couple of days, bring them back to life and make them useful again. Make them not a pain and a thorn in someone's side, but make them something that people can use again. So again, anyone in the room who's an engineer who's worked anywhere, if you're lucky enough to be at a startup that has no legacy code, that's not going to last, right? That's going to go away. The same. It works for open source stuff too. Like you might find a library that's pretty much what you want, but doesn't quite do it. Like instead of, all right, now we need to rewrite this because it doesn't have what we want. You've got tools that can quickly get you up to speed and at least tell you like it's not worth it, right? It's not always the right way to go to fix something. It might be the right way to go to start from scratch, but again, the timing. Like I said, a 200K engineer for a week, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of time spent on something that, maybe it's worthwhile, maybe it's not. But if that context can be brought back to life very quickly, it's a huge money and time saver. And again, going to the human side of things, again, the engineers don't want to be changing that context, right? You've got someone working on a core product, and you need someone to do this thing, to fix this thing for this customer. Like that context switching is a huge time suck and money suck. So having tools to make that less stressful and less time consuming is huge. I think it's been huge for my own sanity too. And it solves the problem too of like, well, John doesn't know Python. He can't work on this. Well, now John can know Python pretty quick.
Actually, I want to, you mentioned 2 things I want to click on, right? I think one of the things I often hear when folks think about AI predominantly being used for vibe coding and prototyping is that there's an understanding element that I think deeply context-aware AIs can help with. Like, they can actually help you understand a very complex piece of a code base that you would otherwise have been very afraid to touch. In the example that you're describing, it sounded like you first started by first understanding, as opposed to somebody else might just say, oh, just go fix this. And they're like, wait, did it actually do something? I don't know if it's correct or not. so the human side of it is you're paging in your memory in terms of what this makes sense so that you can evaluate AI. How do you, let's say you produce something, how do you go about building confidence that it is the right thing? Because it's a legacy part of the code base. I'm curious how you handle that.
I mean, I think again, going back to the human side, like we as humans need to remember that these are tools and we need to use them. I don't want to say responsibly. That is true too. But we need to make sure that we're using them in a way that we're confident in what they're building. And vibe coding is fun. I do it all the time. I'll say, just build this, and I'm going to go, have a cup of coffee. But I think really focusing on teaching people how to use the tools to make sure that they're doing the right thing with them, and make sure that context is keep coming back to the context. Make sure you understand what it's doing and why it did it. Because it can go off the rails. We had a great conversation earlier where I spent a day last week undoing something that AI had hallucinated. Right, it built an entire REST API client for an API that didn't exist because it was like, oh yeah, this must be right because it looks right. So the human element is huge in this. Right, there is a responsibility to make sure that you know what's happening. And keep coming back to explain to me, how this works. Look at the code. Explain to me, why you did it that way. So I think getting into a flow, it takes a little bit more time. It's harder than just saying build this thing for me. But the reward is much more. Like you get people understanding why things work the way they work, and again taking some of the pressure off the actually building the thing, but understanding how it works. Writing the documentation, creating a paper trail in issues and pull requests. It's really great for that kind of stuff. And it keeps you in that engineering flow still. You're not just letting it go off and do what it wants to do. You're using it as a tool, just like you use your IDE, just like you use command line tools. So,
yeah. You want to add something on it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why vibe coding has kind of become a bad word. Because Karpathy, when he introduced the term, and he has an app where he said he doesn't see what the source code is. He simply describes it. If it doesn't work, he asks it to rewrite. I think there exists a series of software that can be vibe coded. Yeah. Like I have a Lightroom plugin that has uses. I don't want to learn Lua. I don't know why Adobe chose Lua. I don't want to learn the Lightroom SDK, right? But Claude wrote it for me, and it moved the burden of me instead of reading code to testing. But so long as it works, if it doesn't work, I simply rewrite it, right?
Totally makes sense. Right tool for the right job, right? Yeah. Makes sense. I want to be mindful of time. I think we have a couple of minutes. I want to touch, I think, on the human side of AI, right? It often, we sometimes might think change is a very smooth, linear process. It's often not the case. Maybe I'll start with Forrest. Any headwinds, tailwinds as you're trying to navigate this AI adoption in the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a handful of things. Like one is anytime you have like a new technology and there's early adoption, like you're bound to run into a lot of like missteps. Like you're going to start doing a thing and realize, oh, that wasn't the right thing. And I think that is, I need to work on this internally, but like I suspect that is a lot of what is related to some of the resistance to the adoption, because there's a fear that engineers have of like, well, I don't want to do the wrong thing. There's a production code base. Like, what if I mess it up? Which, is kind of funny because it's like, well, do you have tests? Like that's kind of a thing, and it's, I think it's important to understand that like in these early stages, like we're going to make mistakes, like that's going to happen. And the key is not like avoid all mistakes at all costs, but instead is to like learn from that mistake and move forward. An example would be like a totally failed project that I did like earlier this year, where I was trying to use, Augment and like MCP tooling in order to have like some really fancy like software quality tool. And it was like, it didn't work at all. And that's fine because I learned a lot along the way, and that informs a lot of decisions moving forward. Again, going back to kind of what I said earlier, I think it's important to understand like humans are good at creativity, at innovation, at novel ideas. Robots are really great at repetitive toil. And like having sort of a clear distinction in your mind of like, let's make sure to use the tool for that job. Let's make sure to use the robot for that job and let our humans do what they're really good at. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the mass layoffs from Coinbase, right? Of hey, if you're not using AI, you're out. That's a really interesting message to send to people. There is a very real world consequence to having a sort of policy like that impacts humans, not just robots. And I think when we start treating humans like robots, you start to get into that. So yeah, there's a lot of learning that has to happen. We're still in early stages, but that's kind of where we're at.
I love the point about, I think for a lot of the eng leaders in the room, I think creating space for the team so that failure is an opportunity for learning, I think is a spot on one. I think we should jump into Q&A.
Cool. I've got a question for you, Anand, where you mentioned that you basically used Augment Code to do some business analyst stuff. So it's not even coding at all. So my question here is at what point do you just use Augment Code or some agent versus writing your own agent where we just had the session in the main room
I think
last time?
eventually what happened to the POC I did was it led to the generation of an agent. Somebody else made it an agent and see if it can be reused somewhere else. When I start doing something, I think I'm doing to solve a problem for me, at which point I'm not thinking about agents, right? If I think it's valuable to somebody else, then I progress to that. I try 15 things and then one sticks. And usually, if you want to make it production code, unfortunately, Augment does not give their context engine and runtime. They don't ship it. So we have our own pipeline, rack pipeline and so on. So somebody else, takes it and runs. So it's no clear-cut answer. You will know, this is valuable that somebody else might use.
I think you covered this a little bit, maybe in parts, and I wanted to connect the dots. Using it on a day-to-day basis, learning from it, and all of that, all these AI agents and technologies. When it comes to using it for business, you said businesses will do what they do. I want you to expand on that a little bit. Do you assess something's ready to be used in a business still with the same parameters as we have traditionally been using, which is it needs to meet a certain criteria before you're ready to put it in production or use it for a business use case, or that set of benchmarks is also evolving and changing, and how you, make yourself feel ready for shipping something built on top of or with AI?
I think for my work at Workday, right? I mean, we deal with very sensitive data. So it is very hard to figure out, can you really ship code that humans haven't verified, validated, and so on. Right? We are figuring it out. I think this is part of the process. You either use automatic PR review systems that review your code. For my personal projects, what I do is I ask Claude to write the code, and then I ask Gemini AI to review it, and so on. I can't do that at work. We have certain, if possible, I use that. But in general, given the sensitive nature of our work, this is part of what we are trying to figure out, right? And unfortunately for me, even though I'm a fairly senior engineer, I get carried away because my PR has AI-generated documentation, which another one of my teammates pointed out yesterday and said, "This is crap. Why did you do this?" Right? So I have the opposite problem, which is, I get carried away too much. But that is actually the problem we have to solve. And I think a part of it is using automated code review tools and such.
Thank you, everyone.